4 years, Brad Pitt said almost nothing. While the headlines exploded, while court documents leaked, while the world argued endlessly about who was right and who was wrong, he stayed quiet. And the silence became its own kind of statement. People filled it with theories, assumptions, anger, sympathy. But now, after 8 long years, he's finally spoken, and what he said was not what anyone expected. To understand why his words hit so hard, you have to remember what Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie once represented. This wasn't just another celebrity relationship. For more than a decade, they were the couple people couldn't stop watching. Together, they looked untouchable. Movie stars, humanitarians, parents to 6 children, owners of a massive French estate and winery called Chateau Miraval. Everywhere they went, cameras followed. Every appearance became an event. Brangelina stopped sounding like a tabloid nickname and started feeling like a permanent part of pop culture itself. They met while filming the movie Mr. and Mrs. Smith in 2004, while Pitt was still married to Jennifer Aniston. The beginning of their relationship was controversial from the start. People argued over timelines for years. But once they were together, they built a life that seemed enormous. They adopted children from Cambodia, Ethiopia, and Vietnam. They welcomed 3 biological children. Then they bought Chateau Miraval in the south of France, eventually marrying there in a private ceremony in 2014. From the outside, it looked too big to fail. Which is exactly why the collapse shocked the world so deeply. Because when something that powerful breaks apart, everybody wants to know why. And behind the glamorous photos and red carpets, something far darker was apparently unfolding. But what was really happening inside that family? And how did everything fall apart so fast? The answer begins on a private jet in September of 2016. Brad Pitt, Angelina Jolie, and their 6 children were flying back to Los Angeles from France. What happened during that flight would become the defining moment of one of Hollywood's most painful divorces. According to legal filings from Jolie's side, Pitt became aggressive before the family even boarded the plane. During the flight, the filings claimed he verbally attacked Jolie, grabbed her, shook her, and pushed her into a wall. The filings also alleged that when one of the children tried to defend their mother, Pitt lunged toward the child. Multiple children were reportedly crying and frightened during the incident. Pitt has always denied physically abusing his family. His legal team called the allegations false and damaging. The FBI investigated and did not file charges. Los Angeles Child Services also investigated and took no action. But within days of that flight, Jolie filed for divorce. And suddenly, the couple that once looked permanent was over. One flight changed everything. But one night alone doesn't explain 8 years of bitterness, lawsuits, and silence. So what happened after the divorce papers were filed? That's where the story becomes even messier. What followed wasn't a clean Hollywood breakup. It became a war. 8 years of legal battles, accusations, sealed court records, custody fights, and public scrutiny. Every new development reopened old wounds. And while the adults fought in courtrooms, the children were growing up in the middle of it all. One of the biggest battles centered around Chateau Miraval, the French winery where they married. By 2021, Jolie wanted to sell her share of the estate. In a letter that later became public, she described the property in heartbreakingly personal terms. She wrote about bringing the twins home there, about marrying Pitt beside a plaque dedicated to her mother, about believing they would grow old there together. Then came the line that caught everyone's attention. Miraval for me died September 2016. Pitt's side accused her of acting vindictively by selling her share to a third party without his approval. Jolie's team denied any wrongdoing. The winery became its own separate legal war running parallel to the divorce itself. And somehow, even after years passed, neither side seemed willing to fully let go. Then came another accusation. Jolie's legal team claimed Pitt tried to make her sign a non-disclosure agreement connected to financial settlements, one that would prevent her from speaking publicly about alleged abuse. Pitt's side denied that interpretation completely. The back and forth never really stopped. Lawyers spoke more than the former couple did. Publicly, they almost never addressed each other directly. Finally, in December 2024, the divorce was officially settled. 8 years after it began. 8 years of lawsuits, tension, and emotional fallout. And when it was finally over, people expected Brad Pitt to say something huge. A confession. A defense. Maybe even regret. Instead, what he said stunned almost everybody. In May 2025, Pitt sat down with GQ while promoting his upcoming film F1. It was the first time he directly addressed the finalized divorce. The world had waited nearly a decade for this moment. And his response was surprisingly calm. When asked whether finalizing the divorce brought him relief, Pitt simply said, "No, I don't think it was that major of a thing. Just something coming to fruition. Legally." That single sentence divided people instantly. Some heard coldness. They thought he was dismissing years of pain as if it were paperwork. Others heard something entirely different. A man who had already emotionally processed the end long before the legal system caught up. Someone who had already grieved privately, long before the cameras stopped paying attention. And then he said something else that revealed even more. Talking about decades of non-stop media attention, Pitt admitted, "My personal life is always in the news. It's been in the news for 30 years, bro." He called it an annoyance he had learned to live with. Then he described his current life in surprisingly simple terms. Warm. Secure. Grounded by friends, relationships, and a better understanding of himself. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't explosive. But maybe that's exactly why it mattered. Because after years of chaos, his words sounded less like a performance and more like exhaustion. But there's one part of this story no interview can fully explain. And that's the relationship between Pitt and his children. Of everything that happened after the divorce, nothing appears more painful than the distance that grew between Brad Pitt and several of his kids. The children are adults now. Maddox is in his 20s. Shiloh is 19. The twins are teenagers. And over the years, multiple reports have suggested that several of them either have limited contact with Pitt or none at all. The clearest sign came in 2024, when Shiloh legally removed Pitt from her last name after turning 18. She became simply Shiloh Jolie. Reports said Brad was deeply hurt by the decision. People close to him claimed he had always wanted a daughter and adored her from the moment she was born. But Shiloh wasn't the only one. Zahora publicly introduced herself as Zahora Marley Jolie at college. Vivian appeared as Vivian Jolie in a Broadway playbill. Maddox had reportedly been estranged from Pitt for years already. The repeated removal of the Pitt surname wasn't random. It sent a message without anybody needing to say the words out loud. Sources close to Pitt say he still has some contact with the younger children, especially the twins. But the overall picture remains heartbreaking. A father separated emotionally from several of his kids, trying to rebuild relationships that may take years to heal, if they ever fully do. And while all of this unfolded publicly, Brad Pitt was privately fighting another battle entirely. One thing often overlooked in this story is how openly Pitt has discussed his struggles with alcohol and recovery. After the separation in 2017, he joined Alcoholics Anonymous. And unlike many celebrities, he spoke about it with unusual honesty. On the Armchair Expert podcast with Dax Shepard, Pitt described AA meetings as life-changing. He talked about hearing men openly discuss failure, vulnerability, addiction, and shame. He admitted he had reached a point where he knew he needed to completely change. Not adjust. Not tweak things around the edges. Completely reboot himself. At one point, he described himself as being on his knees. That phrase stayed with people because it sounded real. Not polished. Not media-trained. Just honest. Sources close to him say he has now been sober for nearly a decade. Friends reportedly believe the change in him is genuine and significant. Pitt himself has talked about learning accountability without drowning in self-hatred. He once said, "No matter the mistake, you just learn from it and move on." And honestly, That doesn't sound like a throwaway quote. It sounds like something he repeated to himself privately for years before saying it publicly. So while the world watched lawsuits and tabloid headlines, Pitt was quietly rebuilding his life from the inside out. But what do their lives actually look like now? And after everything that happened, is there any chance this story ever truly heals? 8 years changes people. It changes families. It changes the shape of old wounds. And today, Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie seem like completely different people from the couple the world once obsessed over. When the divorce was finalized, Jolie's lawyer released a carefully worded statement saying she had focused entirely on finding peace and healing for her family since leaving Pitt. The statement felt deliberate, firm, final. Jolie herself has rarely spoken publicly about the marriage since the split. She hasn't done emotional tell-all interviews. She hasn't publicly dissected the relationship. Instead, she's focused visibly on her children, attending premieres, Broadway events, and college milestones beside them. At the Cannes Film Festival in 2025, she appeared calm and composed with several of her children by her side. Not like someone pretending nothing happened. More like someone who decided the future mattered more than endlessly reliving the past. Pitt's life looks different too. Since 2022, he has reportedly been in a relationship with Insta Ramon and living quietly in Carmel, California. Friends describe the relationship as calm, healthy, and intentional. Even the location says something. Carmel isn't Hollywood. It's not a place built for spectacle. It's quieter, slower. The kind of place where someone goes when they no longer want every moment of life turned into a headline. Professionally, Pitt remains deeply invested in his work, especially his Formula One film project. And from the outside, he appears more stable than he has in years. But stability doesn't erase everything. It doesn't answer every accusation. It doesn't magically repair broken relationships with children. Some damage simply stays complicated forever. And maybe that's the real truth behind all of this. Not a clean ending. Not total redemption. Not total condemnation either. Just two people who survived something painful and public, then spent nearly a decade trying to rebuild separate lives from the wreckage. Because when Brad Pitt finally spoke after 8 years of silence, he didn't deliver a dramatic confession. He didn't launch an attack. He simply said the divorce had become something coming to fruition. Legally. Maybe that sounds cold to some people. Maybe it sounds detached. But maybe it also sounds like someone who already grieved long ago, long before the paperwork ended. Someone who understands that courtrooms can finalize documents, but they can't untangle everything people lose inside a family. What's clear now is that both Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie have moved forward in very different ways. The marriage is over. The lawsuits are mostly over. But the emotional consequences are still unfolding quietly in the background. And after 8 exhausting years, maybe the only honest ending is this one. There are some stories where nobody walks away untouched.